This video is going to get a lot of dislikes. Hello everyone, I'm The Real Rookie, just a guy who's trying to keep it real. If you have visited my channel before, you probably would have found my review of the movie Belladonna of Sadness. In that review, I almost exclusively used the words Japanese animation to describe the art style of the film. I never used the term anime unless I absolutely had to, like if I was describing someone's YouTube video title or their YouTube channel name. Like with the video from Chris Stuckman titled Complete Anime Collection, or the YouTube channel The Anime Man. So, why do I do this? Why do I rarely use the term anime to describe Japanese animation? Before I talk about my reasoning for doing so, I think I should talk about how anime became a term used in the Western world. The term anime in Japan just means animation. Not just Japanese animation, it means all forms of animation, regardless if it's two-dimensional, three-dimensional, comes from America, Europe, Russia, whatever. It just means any form of animation. If you would ask a Japanese person what recent anime they have seen, and they say Frozen from 2013, that would technically be true from the Japanese perspective of the word.
アニメを見ることはありますか？
ねえへんな。私全くない。見たことあるもんがないわな。花雪を見たわ。
The term anime is actually a pretty recent addition to the Japanese language. It started to catch steam in the late 60s and early 70s, whenever animation from Japan started to become popular in, well, Japan. Before the 60s and 70s, the most popular forms of animation in Japan was the stuff from Walt Disney Studios. So, why did Japan start to use the term anime to refer to animation? The Japanese usually shorten longer words into shorter words. Why? I can't really explain that. The only reason I've been able to find is that shortening long words into short words is just something that is common in Japanese language and culture. So, how did the West come to use the term anime? Well, we have to go back to the 1980s for that answer. Japanese animated shows and movies have been getting dubs and subtitles for Western audiences since the 1960s. However, the West started to show more interest in Japanese animation towards the late 70s and early 80s, with shows like Gundam and Macross, also known as Robotech in the West. In the 80s, most Westerners who were into Japanese animation called it Japanimation, which is just a combination of the words Japan and animation. This is obviously used to describe animation that comes from Japan. Towards the late 80s and early 90s, Japanimation was phased out for the term anime, which is now the most widely accepted term to refer to Japanese animation in Western culture. With all that being said, here are my reasons for why I don't like to use the term anime when I talk about Japanese or Eastern animation. When you ask someone what the term anime means, they will usually say it is cartoons from Japan with a particular art style. If that is the case, then how do you explain when an anime has a different art style from what is considered an anime art style? Belladonna of Sadness is a great example of a piece of Japanese animation that has an art style that is different from the norm of the time. And speaking of time periods, Belladonna of Sadness is also a really old film. If the anime is old, like from the 70s or 80s, is it still an anime art style? Those older styles of Japanese animation look drastically different from what we would call an anime art style today. If the art style is different from what we would consider calling modern-day anime, then is it still an anime? What about Western shows that take inspiration from Japanese art styles like Teen Titans, Transformers Animated, and Avatar: The Last Airbender? Are those anime? Most would argue that they aren't because they aren't animated by Japanese people. If we are to go with the earlier statement that anime is cartoons from Japan with a particular art style, then the particular art style is still a part of this definition. How about shows that are in a Western art style meant to be shown to a Western audience but are animated by Japanese people? The show Ulysses 31 from 1981 fits this example perfectly. It is Japanese animated and it is for Western audiences, but it is not in an anime art style. Most would say that this is not an anime, but it meets half of the criteria of the statement that anime is cartoons from Japan with a particular art style. Must anime meet both of these criteria to be considered anime? Continuing with art styles, what about video games? Sonic the Hedgehog is a character that is drawn in what most would consider an anime art style, and the Sonic artwork does originate from Japan, but people don't call Sonic games anime games, they just call them video games. What if the video game is based off of a Japanese animated series like Dragon Ball? Is that an anime game because it originates from an anime, or is it just a video game? What if someone states that they like cute anime girls?
Cute anime girls!
What is the definition of an anime girl? Is it a drawing of a girl in a piece of Japanese animated media? Is it a drawing of a Japanese girl? Is an anime girl referring to the art style that the girl is drawn in? If so, then does the girl need to be drawn by Japanese people? Or can the term anime girl be used to describe any drawing of a girl in the typical Japanese art style, regardless of the ethnicity of the person that drew the art? But then that raises the question of what a Japanese art style even is. You can probably name an art style based on the studio that made the animation, like Walt Disney Studios, Studio Ghibli, or Pixar, but can you really say that a certain group of people own an art style? And blah 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 blah. As you can see, the term anime can be quite confusing to define. It is a word that is very specific yet very broad in its definition. Trying to define the word anime is like trying to define a trendy word on the internet like Chad, Stacy, or Karen. This video totally isn't going to become dated in the future now that I've said that. However, definitions aren't the only reason I don't use the term anime. I have one last reason why I don't use the term anime to describe Japanese or Eastern animation. I feel like the term anime can alienate people who aren't into Japanese animation, but are thinking of getting into it. I think that the term anime can carry a bit of negative stigma around Japanese animation. There are a few stereotypes about Japanese animation, such as it can be really weird, it being super goofy or silly, it having overly perverted shows or scenes in a series. No, I am not referring to Japanese animated pornography, or hentai, as some would call it, which is also a term I don't use. The scenes having overly long dialogue segments without much movement, it being overdramatic, among many other negative stereotypes of Japanese animation. To someone who is into Japanese animation and has watched it for a long enough time, they know that these are things that can be a part of Japanese animation, but for the most part, it is pretty uncommon and is usually found in very tasteless or bad pieces of Japanese animated media. However, to someone outside of Japanese animation fan culture, the stereotypes I mentioned before can seem like reality. That is why when I am trying to recommend a Japanese animated show or movie to someone, I use the terms animation, Japanese animation, or Eastern animation when trying to describe the visual or cultural origin of the Eastern animated movie or show I am recommending. I just want to end this video off by saying that I am not trying to be the language police or anything like that. If you like to use the term anime, I'm not going to go on a long rant like I did in this video to explain to you why you shouldn't use that term to describe Japanese animation. I'm not trying to argue that I am right and that other people are wrong. Whatever terms you want to use to describe Japanese animation is perfectly fine. This video is just me explaining my reasons for not using the word anime when describing Japanese or Eastern animation. Thanks for watching, and feel free to like, comment, or subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I'm The Real Rookie, and it's been real.